Neville's Winter Wonderland. It was Christmas time on the island of Sodor. The engines loved this time of the year. They were very excited. There was to be a Christmas party at Tidmouth station. The Fat Controller was hoping that this year's carol party was a very special one. Neville was the most excited of all. He loved listening to the carol singers, the passengers wearing the Santa hats, and the best bit of all was a Christmas tree. Neville popped into Tidmouth station with the workmen. They were helping to put up the decorations. The Fat Controller was there talking to Rosie.
"This is going to be the best Christmas party ever,"
smiled Neville.
"I can't wait for tonight,"
said Rosie. The Fat Controller gave Rosie her next job. "Rosie, you are to collect the Christmas tree from the docks," he said.
"Oh, yes, sir,"
smiled Rosie.
"Thank you, sir."
This made her very happy. Neville felt disappointed. He wanted to collect the Christmas tree.
"Can I help her, please?"
he asked. "No, Neville," replied the Fat Controller, "but I do have another job for you." Neville looked at the Fat Controller. "The Christmas food for the party is ready," said the Fat Controller. "I would like you to collect it from the chocolate factory and bring it here."
"Yes, sir,"
agreed Neville, and he puffed away to collect the party food. Rosie left to collect the Christmas tree. Neville puffed happily along the line towards the chocolate factory. He was looking forward to the Christmas party.
"What could make the Christmas party even better?"
he thought to himself. Then he looked all around. He noticed something. He looked and saw that there was something missing. Then he realised what it was.
"Where's all the snow?"
he puffed.
"We can't have Christmas without snow."
"Don't worry, Neville," puffed his driver. "The snow will come in its own time. We just have to be patient." But Neville wanted the snow to come now. Soon he arrived at the chocolate factory. His vans were being loaded with cakes, buns, and there was even a special Christmas log cake for the party. "We'll have your vans loaded and ready in no time," said the factory manager. Neville waited and waited for a long time. The men had to take care loading all the party food. They didn't want to drop any of the food or spoil it. Suddenly Neville felt something touch his nose.
"Look, what's this?"
he asked, puzzled. His driver looked up in surprise. "Neville!" he cried. "Look up there!" Neville looked up and gasped. The sky was now full of dark clouds, and falling from the skies were small specks of snowflakes. They fell like leaves from the trees.
"It's snowing!"
cheered Neville happily. The factory manager was pleased too. "Now we can have a white Christmas after all," he said. Neville was very pleased to hear this.
"The children will be very pleased with all this snow now,"
he thought to himself. At last the vans were loaded and Neville was ready to go. "You be careful," said the factory manager. "The tracks will be slippery and you don't have a snow plough."
"I will,"
promised Neville.
"I'll take great care."
The driver and fireman climbed back into the cab. The fireman shoveled more coal into the fire. Neville got up steam. Men hustled and bustled, removing all of the empty crates on the platform. The last truck door banged. The guard blew his whistle, waved his green flag. The goods train was ready to go. "Steady does it, Neville," said the driver.
Come on,
puffed Neville to the trucks. But the trucks didn't reply. They felt cold. Neville puffed out of the siding and made his way to Tidmouth station. He looked all around as the snow continued to fall. It looked magical.
"Doesn't the snow look wonderful?"
asked Neville. "It certainly does," replied the driver, "but we must be careful. Snow can cause trouble."
"I'm sure it won't be no trouble for me,"
reassured Neville.
"I'm a careful engine."
"Snow can cause trouble for any engine," called his fireman, "even for engines like you." Neville would have gotten worried about this, but he decided not to think about it. The snow began to pile up and turn into drifts. The tracks became slippery and the trees looked white from top to bottom. Neville puffed through Wellsworth Station and past Edward, who was resting in a siding. "Be careful when going up the hill," whistled Edward. "The tracks will be slippery, and it's a steep climb."
I will.
shouted Neville. He soon came to the hill, and he thundered his way up. Neville huffed and puffed as hard as he could, but Edward was right. The tracks were slippery. But Neville wouldn't give up.
I must do it. I must do it.
He puffed. His wheels spun and his pistons pumped harder. He could see the top of the hill slowly coming towards him. "Nearly there, old boy," encouraged the fireman. At last Neville could feel the rails going downhill. As he started to go down, he asked his driver to slow down. His driver put a hand on his brake, but this didn't help much at all. Neville felt his wheels slip on the icy rails. He slid down the hill and round the bend.
Stop! Please!
cried Neville. "I can't!" shouted the driver. The driver blew his whistle to let the signalman know what was happening. The signalman heard this and looked out of the window. He could see a runaway train fast approaching. He quickly changed the point and picked up his red flag. Neville could see the signalman waving the red flag. Now he was determined to stop.
Help!
He shouted. He ran into the siding and saw the buffers ahead. He shut his eyes and with a loud crash he hit the buffers and landed wheels first in a large pile of snow. Luckily the driver and fireman had jumped clear. The workman rushed over to see if Neville was hurt.
Oh dear.
Groaned Neville.
I'm stuck.
The signalman telephoned for help. He came back with bad news. "I'm afraid that Rocky and Harvey can't get here due to the snowdrifts," he said, "so I'm afraid I'll have to wait a while."
But it's freezing out here.
Shivered Neville. "Can't be helped, I'm afraid," replied the signalman, "so it seems you'll have no choice." The Neville's crew went to the signal box to take shelter. Neville sat sadly in the snow. He watched as the flakes of snow fell from the sky and onto the ground. He was slowly turning into a snow engine. He was turning white from tender to boiler.
Oh dear.
He thought.
Arthur would never let me forget this.
Thomas and Emily were doing their best to clear the tracks, but it wasn't easy. Harvey was trying to keep Rocky steady, but Rocky was thinking about poor Neville. "I hope Neville isn't too cold," he thought to himself. "Nobody would like to be out here in a snowstorm." After a long trip, they finally reached the place where Neville was supposed to be. Thomas and Emily set off to find Neville, with Rocky and Harvey not far behind. The friends looked around for Neville, but he was nowhere to be seen. "Neville!" called Thomas. "Where are you?" But there was no reply. "That's strange," said Harvey. "There's no sign of him." Then they heard a faint sound.
Did you hear that?
asked Emily.
I thought I heard something.
Everyone listened carefully, but they couldn't hear anything. "You were probably hearing things," said Rocky.
There it is again,
called Emily. Thomas looked all around. Then he saw a large pile of snow right by a signal box. "Look at that!" he cried. "I've never seen so much snow."
Get me out!
"Wait a minute," puffed Harvey. "That sounds like Neville."
Over here!
"That is Neville!" exclaimed Thomas. "He's stuck in the snow."
quick Rocky,
shouted Emily.
poor Neville must be freezing his boiler in there.
But it was some time before Rocky could start work. The workmen had to dig away all of the snow away from Neville. The drivers and firemen had to help too, and Neville was so cold his face felt like a large ice cube. Finally, after a long wait, Thomas pulled the trucks clear of the siding. Then Rocky carefully lifted Neville back onto the tracks. Neville was so cold he couldn't move. The workman had to clear the snow away from his wheels, and his crew were trying to sort out a new fire. Soon the new fire was burning, and the fireman shoveled more coal into the boiler. Firewood was put in to help as well. Emily helped Neville out of the siding and onto the main line. By the time everyone was ready to leave, Neville was soon fired up and ready to go.
I'll help you back to the station,
smiled Emily.
Thank you, Emily,
agreed Neville. Then they all set off back to Tidmouth station. Thomas took the train of vans, Harvey pulled Rocky, and Emily helped a warm but cold Neville along the line. They reached the station safely, but the sun had almost gone down. The Fat Controller was there waiting. "Well done, all of you," he said. "You all did very well." Then he turned to Neville.
I'm sorry, sir,
he sighed sadly. "You did your best, Neville," he said. "It wasn't your fault, but I think in future you should be a bit more careful."
Yes, sir,
said Neville. That evening, everything was soon ready. Everyone was waiting for the party to start. Then, the lights suddenly came on. Everyone gasped in amazement. "Look at all those lights!" cried Percy. "They look wonderful!" "Yes, indeed," agreed Arthur. "I've never seen lights like this before." The Fat Controller held up his hand for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Tidmouth Christmas party. Please give 3 cheers for Thomas the Tank Engine and all his friends for helping to make this party possible." Everyone cheered and clapped. The engines whistled in delight, except Neville. He was feeling very ashamed of himself. Rosie was worried for her friend. So did everyone else.
"Don't blame yourself,"
said Rosie.
"You didn't know the accident was going to happen."
"We all have our problems with the snow," added Thomas. "Even I do."
But the important thing of all is that you're safe and sound,
put in Emily. The Fat Controller agreed. "I know you feel bad, Neville," he said, "but don't let that accident get to you. Even the careful engines like you can have their mishaps." "He's right, you know," said Arthur. "I'm a careful engine too, but there are times when I can have problems too." Neville thought about this very carefully. Then he began to smile a little.
"So I'm not fully to blame for the accident then?"
he said.
"Of course not,"
smiled Emily.
"but it's always best to take great care when you're out in the snow."
All of the engines agreed with Emily. Neville looked at his friend Thomas.
I guess snow does cause trouble for all of us,
He said.
But there I was thinking I could beat the snow.
Thomas smiled at his friend.
But if only I hadn't wished for a winter wonderland in the first place.
Neville went on.
Then the snow wouldn't have arrived and I wouldn't have gotten stuck.
But Thomas looked at the children nearby. They had built snowmen and were throwing snowballs about. There were even some children riding on sledges. But if you hadn't wished for a winter wonderland, put in Thomas, the children wouldn't be having this much fun in the snow. Neville looked at the children in the snow, and as the carol singers started to sing, he gave his big smile.
Maybe having a winter wonderland isn't such a bad thing after all.
He grinned.
We angels may not like it, but the children certainly do. I'm glad I wish for all this snow after all.
Everyone cheered for Neville, and the children even waved happily to him.
Maybe next year you could take the Christmas tree,
Suggested Rosie.
Not a bad idea,
Thought Neville.
but maybe I could do with a back engine to help me.
Why's that? Asked Percy.
I don't want to have another winter mishap again.
Explained Neville.
Next time I could end up looking like Jack Frost.
All of the engines laughed, and Neville felt very happy to be at the station with all his friends. This was the best Christmas party he had ever been to.
Happy Christmas, everyone!
He whistled happily.